How does God speak to the sign of Libra? There's a question no Libra can ignore after hearing it. What if God's voice in your life had never arrived peacefully? What if it had arrived precisely during that discomfort you'd spent years trying to eliminate? That weight that appeared without warning, that imbalance that wouldn't go away, that tension that everyone around you had already forgotten, but that continued to vibrate within you. You thought it was anxiety. You thought it was oversensitivity. What if it was the only way the divine found to be heard by you? There's a common idea circulating when discussing receiving divine guidance, that God speaks through peace. When the right decision appears, you feel a sudden calm, a tranquil certainty, a relief that arrives like a breeze. And perhaps this is true for some signs. Perhaps Cancer feels this. Perhaps Pisces recognizes this calm. But Libra doesn't work that way. It never has. For Libra, the divine rarely speaks of immediate peace. It speaks of imbalance. It speaks of that lingering discomfort, that thing that feels wrong and that you can't ignore no matter how hard you try. It speaks of the tension that remains even after everyone around you has moved on. It speaks of the weight that stays exactly where you least wanted it to stay. And here's the point that changes everything. Libra spent entire decades trying to eliminate this imbalance as quickly as possible. It interpreted the discomfort as a flaw. It treated the tension as an enemy. It rushed towards harmony, not because harmony was right, but because the imbalance was too unbearable to sustain. But something was happening within this imbalance. Information was being transmitted, guidance was being delivered. And the moment Libra resolved everything too quickly, forced the agreement, yielded prematurely, softened the conflict before it could reveal what it needed to reveal, the message was interrupted. It wasn't weakness, it was a reflex. An old reflex, built up over years of trying to keep everything in its place. Imagine receiving an important call in the middle of a noisy environment. The noise is bothersome. The voice on the other end is difficult to hear. And you have two options: leave the noisy environment or hang up. Libra almost always hung up. Not because they didn't want to listen, but because the noise was unbearable and leaving seemed impossible at that moment. And that connection had something important on the other side. Now think about how many times in your life you've felt that specific weight, that nameless discomfort, that tension that everyone around you had already forgotten, but which still vibrated within you as something that hadn't quite finished being resolved. Think about how many times you tried to solve it before understanding what it was. Think about how much energy was spent trying to make the discomfort stop, instead of asking why it was still there, why it persisted, why it returned every time you thought it was over. Because there is a very big difference between an imbalance that needs to be resolved and an imbalance that needs to be listened to. And Libra, with all its sensitivity, with all its ability to perceive what is out of place, confused these two things for a long time. And this confusion came at a high price, not in failure, in silence, in the silence of all the messages that arrived wrapped in discomfort and were returned before being opened. The signal wasn't the problem. The signal was the channel, and the channel was being shut down every time it became too strong to handle. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. It's not a book about astrology in the technical sense. It's a book about how Libra was built to receive guidance, and why that guidance almost always comes through discomfort, imbalance, and persistent tension. It won't tell you what to do. It will show you how you already know what to do, and why you've spent so much time doubting that knowledge. At this point in the video, you're still processing something. You still have that feeling that there's a truth here that you recognize, but that you've never organized in this way. And that's exactly the moment. Not after you finish the video, not tomorrow when clarity seems easier. Now, while it's still alive within you, while the recognition is still active. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And before we continue, in the comments below, answer me this question. Think of a situation in your life where you resolved a discomfort before understanding it. Today, looking back, what do you think it was trying to tell you? Because there is a specific language that the divine uses with LIBRA. And understanding this language begins with an uncomfortable question. What happens to a message when the receiver is always trying to silence the channel? Think of a measuring instrument, a thermometer, a seismograph, a pressure gauge. These instruments exist precisely to record variations, to vibrate when something changes, to signal when something has deviated from the expected pattern. They are not defective when they go off. They are functioning exactly as they were designed. LIBRA is just that. A precise and refined detection tool, calibrated over years of accumulated emotional experience. Every time you sense something is wrong in a relationship before anything has been said, every time you perceive an injustice that no one else seems to have noticed, every time that specific weight appears for no apparent reason, that's not hypersensitivity. That's the tool at work. And the tool works even when it's inconvenient. Even when the environment isn't prepared to receive the information, even when the message arrives in the form of conflict, separation, loss, things that crumble before they can be rebuilt. There's a certain cruelty to it if you look at it from a certain angle, because LIBRA is the sign that most desires harmony, and it's precisely this sign that receives divine messages wrapped in imbalance. As if the universe knew that it's the only way to guarantee that LIBRA will pay attention, that it will stop, that it won't just move on without understanding. Do you know what's most difficult in this story? It's not the imbalance itself, it's what comes with it, the temptation to fix it, the pressure, internal and external, to fix it quickly, to smooth things over, to find a middle ground before the tension reaches the point it needs to reach, to reveal what's hidden inside. And it was precisely there, at that point of maximum pressure, at that moment when the desire to resolve things clashed with something deeper that said, "Wait, not yet," that you probably made some of the decisions you regretted most, not because they were wrong in themselves, but because they were made too early. Before the message had finished sinking in, God didn't interrupt the conversation. You hung up the phone. This pattern, solving before understanding, interrupting before listening, is exactly what the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose maps out with a clarity that will stop you mid-reading, not as theory, as recognition. Like that moment when you read a sentence and think, how does this person know this? Because this book was built for LIBRA, for the specific way you have of receiving, processing, and resisting guidance before finally yielding to it. If you are at this point feeling that there is something here you needed to hear a long time ago, this book is the next step. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. So what does it mean to perpetuate the imbalance instead of resolving it? It doesn't mean being paralyzed. It doesn't mean letting everything crumble while you passively watch. It means something much more subtle and much more difficult for LIBRA than any action they could take. It means waiting actively. There is a difference between a retracted antenna and an extended antenna. Both may appear inactive to an outside observer, but the first is not picking up anything, and the second is picking up everything. LIBRA's active waiting is the extended antenna. It is the state in which you hold on to discomfort without resolving it, without softening it, without finding a middle ground prematurely, and remain available for whatever tension is carrying. Your best decisions, the right ones, the ones you look back on and think, that was perfect, I don't know how I got it right. They probably didn't come from quick thinking. They came from a moment when you waited longer than you wanted to. when you bore the weight more than seemed possible, and suddenly, effortlessly, without apparent logic, the answer was there. It didn't just arrive, it was always there. You simply finally became quiet enough to receive it. This is the divine speaking to Libra, not in thunder, not in visions, in clarity that appears on the other side of the discomfort you could barely bear. And then there's the question of the messenger. Because the divine, when it wants to communicate with Libra, doesn't necessarily choose the most comfortable channel. It doesn't send the message through the person you respect most, at the moment you are most receptive, with the best chosen words. The divine uses what is available, and sometimes what is available is the person you least expected, the conflict you wanted to avoid, the situation you were trying to circumvent. Think of someone who, at some point in your life, said something that deeply irritated you at the time, and that you only understood months later. Something that bothered you in a way that wouldn't go away, that you tried to dismiss as an irrelevant opinion from someone who didn't know you well enough. And that, over time, became one of the most important things anyone has ever said to you. Who sent this message? What was the real source of that persistent annoyance? The divine has no preference for beautiful messengers. It prefers messengers who arrive at the right place at the right time. And Libra, with all its sensitivity, is perhaps the only sign that can perceive the message, even when the messenger is imperfect. Even when it comes wrapped in conflict, in harshness, in words spoken in the worst possible way. The problem is that Libra is also the sign that most easily dismisses the messenger, that judges the form before evaluating the content, that fails to hear an important truth because the voice carrying it didn't have the tone it expected. And here's a pattern worth examining honestly. How many times have you dismissed a message because the messenger wasn't who you wanted it to be? How many truths have you let slip by because they arrived from the wrong mouth at the wrong time, with the wrong energy? It's not judgment, it's just a question. Because Libra, which has the most refined ability to perceive emotional nuances, sometimes uses this ability to filter instead of listening, to evaluate the container before tasting the contents. And this, in the spiritual realm, comes at a high price, because the divine doesn't schedule appointments. It doesn't choose the most convenient channel. It sends through what is available and expects you to be able to recognize the message regardless of the packaging. There's a chapter on this specific mechanism, Libra's tendency to filter the message through the messenger within the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. It shows how this filtering, which appears as discernment, is actually a defense mechanism that sometimes protects Libra from the wrong things, and sometimes from the right ones, and how to develop the ability to separate the channel from the message, to hear what is being said without being dominated by how it is being said. This is the kind of clarity that doesn't appear on its own. It needs to be built. And this book is one of the best tools for that. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There is a type of silence that Libra interprets as abandonment. Not the silence that follows a fight, not the silence of a relationship that has cooled. It's spiritual silence, that period when you're asking for guidance and receiving nothing, when you're searching for signs and the universe seems to have hung up the phone, when you're waiting and the waiting delivers nothing visible, nothing you can name, nothing that confirms you're on the right path. And Libra, during these periods, usually does one of two things. Either you start acting hastily, making decisions just to end the uncertainty, or you collapse. She interprets the silence as proof that she's alone, that the guidance has ended, that something has gone wrong on a fundamental level, but you're thinking of a scale in perfect balance. A perfectly balanced scale doesn't move. The two pans remain at exactly the same height, motionless, stable, and it is precisely when it doesn't move that it is most accurate. When it is vibrating, oscillating, tilting from side to side, it is still arriving at the answer. When it stops, quiet and motionless, the answer has already arrived. The silence Libra feels during these periods isn't a lack of guidance, it's perfect balance. It's the moment when the scales have finally stopped, and the answer is already there, not as movement, but as presence. Like a certainty that doesn't need to announce itself, because it's already part of you. The quietest periods of your life likely preceded the greatest clarity. The phases in which you felt the universe had stopped responding were, more often than not, the phases immediately preceding a change you couldn't yet see, but that was already happening. The silence wasn't abandonment. It was arrival. And Libra, so accustomed to seeking, listening, perceiving, can hardly recognize an answer that makes no sound. There's something more here, though, something that goes beyond silence and imbalance. It's the role Libra plays, not just in its own life, but in the field around it. Think of a tuning fork for a moment. Not the instrument musicians use to tune, but the principle it represents. An object that vibrates at a specific frequency, and by vibrating, invites everyone around it to align with that frequency. It doesn't force, it doesn't demand, it simply vibrates. And the resonance spreads naturally to those nearby. Libra functions this way in a group, in a family, in a work environment, in a friendship. When it is calibrated, when it is in touch with its own sense of justice, with its own perception of what is unbalanced, it changes the field around it without needing to do anything explicit. People around a calibrated Libra make better decisions. They perceive more. They question more. They treat each other with more care. And when Libra is out of balance, when it's so busy trying to maintain peace that it's lost touch with its own sense of truth, the atmosphere around it also becomes discordant. Things get a little more murky. Decisions are made a little more hasty. Injustice encounters less resistance. This is weight. It's a responsibility that Libra rarely names because it has never thought of it that way. But it feels it. It feels like the fatigue of always noticing. It feels like the exhaustion of always being the emotional barometer of the environment. It feels like the loneliness of seeing what others don't see and not knowing what to do with it. But fatigue isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that the instrument is working. The issue isn't about ceasing to perceive. It's about learning to use what you perceive in a way that doesn't exhaust you before revealing its true purpose. You were built to calibrate, not just yourself, everything around you. And the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose is, in essence, a recalibration manual, not in the sense that it will tell you what's wrong, but that it will show you how Libra was designed to function when aligned with its purpose. Sensitivity to imbalance, the ability to perceive what others ignore, these aren't flaws to correct, but tools to sharpen. When a precision instrument is out of calibration, it doesn't need to be replaced. It needs adjustment, and this book is that adjustment. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There is a tuning fork. You've probably seen one. It's that U-shaped metal rod that, when struck, vibrates at a specific frequency and emits a pure sound. Musicians use it to tune instruments, not because the tuning fork plays music, but because it vibrates at the right note, and everything around it can align with it. Libra is a tuning fork. She wasn't created to make music alone. She was created to vibrate at the right frequency, so that everything around her can align. So that injustice finds a counterpoint, so that imbalance finds guidance, so that chaos finds a point of reference that doesn't bend, even when it seems like it's about to break. And the divine, whatever you call that force, speaks to Libra through its own vibration, through the imbalance that activates the instrument, through the discomfort that proves the instrument is still functioning, through the silence that arrives when the right frequency has finally been reached. You don't need to search for God, not in the sense of looking for something far away, something that needs to be found, something that may have gotten lost somewhere in the life you've built. What you need is to learn to recognize when he is already speaking, to not disconnect the channel when it gets too noisy, to not resolve things before listening, to not dismiss the messenger before receiving the message, because everything you've ever felt, every weight that appeared in your chest without warning, every imbalance that wouldn't go away no matter how hard you tried to balance it, every silence that seemed like abandonment but was actually an answer that had already arrived, was communication. It was the specific, precise, and absolutely personal language that the divine uses to communicate with those who carry the scales. And the scales are not a symbol of indecision. They never have been. It is a symbol of sacred precision, of an instrument so refined that it can detect the difference between what seems right and what is right, between what others need to hear and what is true, between forced harmony and real harmony, the kind that doesn't need to be sustained with effort because it was born from the right place. You were calibrated for this. And when you stop fighting against the instrument itself, when you stop trying to silence the channel that was built to receive, when you allow the imbalance to finish speaking before you try to fix it, that's when the voice that was always there can finally be heard clearly. It wasn't silence, it was waiting, and waiting always knew what it was doing.